Hello, welcome to the August 17th, 2021 Club Cubase live stream. We'll just get started here in just a moment. I'm going to do a quick audio test. Make sure everything is coming through okay. Hello, welcome to... All right, sounds like everything is coming through as expected. So my name is Greg Undo. I'll be the host for the live stream today. If you have not attended a live stream before, this is where you can basically ask any questions on Steinberg related products, and we'll try to answer them for you. And so you could ask questions either by submitting them in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de, or you could just ask in the chat field. So we'll try to get through as many of the questions as completely and succinctly as possible. Sometimes people's ability to ask questions will far exceed my ability to answer them in real time. So when asking questions, if you don't get an immediate response, if we could try to refrain from repeating the question, it just kind of slows down the whole process for me in getting through all the questions. And when asking questions, if you could specify which operating system you're running, which version of Cubase, where it's Cubase Pro, Cubase Elements. If you're on Mac or PC, that information is helpful. Like many of you during this time, my family is at home during the pandemic, so I may get interrupted by my son. He starts school next week, so he's on his last week of summer vacation. But I may have to do something for him real quick, change it, get a TV show on for him or something like that. So I'll apologize in advance for any interruptions, but we'll try to go for about 4 hours today. Just a couple of people I will give a shout out to. So, we will have the comments hopefully tonight with all of the topics that are covered in the live stream today with timestamps. And if you wanted to search for those for previous live streams, Jan at cubaseindex.com is created that site. So again, cubaseindex.com. Jan from Sweden in Stockholm. So you could check that as a wonderful resource. We have two people that serve as moderators that help out. We usually have a very well-behaved crowd. So we give a special thanks to Agent K and Jazz Dude. Jazz Dude is also involved with another wonderful resource of Steinberg information online. It's a wonderful collection of different tutorial videos, but you could check it out, and it's the Cubase Nation Discord. So if you're watching the live stream live, feel free to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from. So once again, my name is Greg Undo. I work as a product specialist for focusing primarily on Steinberg products in the United States of America. I'm just presenting from outside of Washington, D.C. in Alexandria, Virginia. So, but we'll get started here in just a couple minutes. We see some more people are getting logged in, and we'll see some questions coming in, and we'll get started soon. All right, so let's see who is on. So far, I don't see any questions yet. Let me just kind of scroll down. All right, I'm going to break out my chat field so I could read it a little easier. All right, so we have Metamobi from Nigeria, and we see John Costigan. We have Miguel from Manila. All right, so we have Berlin. We have Jan from Stockholm. Loretta from Vancouver. Mex Strat from checking in from India. All right, we have Joseph from New Jersey. All right, we have David Evans from the UK. All right, we have another person from India. We have Matthias from Hamburg. All right, we have Neil from north of Toronto. Okay, so I just see a question from Ted Springman. When sample triggering from a live snare track, is there some crazy trick like recording with a sock over the microphone so when adjusting the threshold, the ghost notes aren't lost? All right, so let me just open up like a live drum recording here. I have this project kind of set up with. All right, so let's say if I wanted to come over here to my snare, so it's really not any recording techniques when you're doing sample triggering, but you want to just it's going to be based upon the hit points, and generally the hit points can be based upon the threshold. So if I want to look at this particular snare track, I could, just go to the sample editor. We could adjust our threshold here so that we don't want to include, let's say, if we just solo this particular track here and play. Then I don't get the toms. But you could just, manually add the hit points if if you need to, if it's not catching it, or just be able to adjust, based on the threshold here. So, a lot of times, you don't have to worry about the threshold as much if it's, if you did a really good job of isolating tracks. There's many scenarios where bands have gone through and just recorded the snare completely isolated, so it's not picking up the hi-hat. I think like the Cars tracks, the band from the late 70s and 80s, like their toms would always sound huge because they would just record the toms completely separately so that they could be isolated and processed independently. But just adjust the threshold, and then when you come over here just to create MIDI notes, we could just come over here. We're going to put it on to, let's say, our first selected track where I have a groove agent. So let's, again, come here. We'll create our MIDI notes, put it onto D1, and then that will make all of our... And when we do one other thing I'll point out here, let's say when we do the snare top and we go to create the MIDI notes, you could also just choose, instead of fixed velocity, that dynamic velocity, and that will help. But sometimes, mic positioning can make a difference. But often just how you adjust with the threshold in manually adding in threshold as you listen to it can make a big difference for you, Ted. And great to see you on the live stream. Great to see Tim Weinheimer, and we have Christian D68 from France. We have Michael Pierce from outside of London. All right. So we had a question from Doug. He says, Doug from Virginia, USA, Nuendo 11, Greg. I sent an email about collaborating with a friend who just bought Cubase Pro 11. I want to be able to save my NPR to CPR. So you don't really have to do anything special for that because Cubase can open up the CPR file. So if you wanted to just come over here, let's say I'll just open up a Nuendo project. So it's really, the files are pretty interchangeable, but let's say if I just wanted to open up an NPR file, I don't have to do any conversion at all. I could just go into my Cubase and just open up the Nuendo project. So it's a .npr as opposed to a .cpr file. So there's no problems kind of taking your files back and forth between the two programs. On Windows, you may have to, when you get it open, You may see like a files of type and it may default to .cpr. But if you just set that to .any file or there'll be a choice for .cpr and .npr. That the file formats are basically interchangeable between the two programs. Worst case scenario is the person could go to the particular project. Let's say if you just go to just here, and I could just say open with, and you could just, right click on the actual icon and just open. And you see here that I could open this with Nuendo. I could open it with Cubase, Cubase LE, etc. So the .cpr and .npr files are in essence, almost identical, and you could freely open those up. All right, and we have Jua from Finland checking in. Thanks for joining us. All right, question. How can I design a tape stop effect with Cubase plugins? So what I would probably do is go to the Loop Mash FX, and this could do it quickly. So let's see if I have this particular file open. And you could put this on a group, and it's going to be found under other in your plugin categories in the Steinberg. But I'll just come to my stereo out here. So, and we'll see Loop Mash FX. So if you wanted to quickly, and you notice that this will look like a piano keyboard because you can play it via MIDI, but if you want to do like, and you could set the pulse to be longer, so if you want it to be, so say I want that to be a little faster, I could set the pulse to a quarter note, and you get to do other performance effects. Like I just want to come here. So that's a great plugin for doing tape stop effects. I think that will do the trick. All right, so we have Aviv from Israel checking in, and Neurotic Nexus from Germany. Great to see you on the live stream. Glad you could join us. Excuse me. All right. All right. So I just see I can't use Spectra Layers Pro 8 in Cubase Elements 11. I just activated the 30-day trial, but I can only run it in standalone, it seems. So I'm not sure if the Cubase Elements has the ARA extension in it. So it might be just limited to Cubase Pro or Cubase Artist and Cubase Pro. So that's probably why it's not integrated, because I don't think that the Cubase Elements version has that handy. Great to see you on the live stream. All right, we have Filter Freak checking in from UK. All All right, so we see from Extract, why do I see spikes on my data load cache meter every time I pause or play, even on new project with nothing loaded up? It's because it's, buffering information. So if I just kind of start a new project and let's open up our performance meter, as soon as, like, even with minimal projects, you may just notice that it may just kind of jump around. So let's say if I jump back to this particular project here, because you could always think of that as audio is playing, that there's always going to be some information that's going to be buffered. So let's open this up. So as I hit play, you may see like the disk cache, and that's basically, playing, getting the audio ready to play that fast. So you may notice that at the beginning and at the start of the file, because it's now playing back a number of different audio files and it's, caching that information. But you'll notice a little spike kind of at the start. It's nothing to be concerned about. It's just kind of showing what it's doing to get the audio to all play back at the same time. All right, so we have a question for David Evans. Greg, I'm on Cubase 11 Pro. How do I assign Cubase functions like transport, editor, etc., and CC1 for mod wheel to faders, buttons, and knobs to my external MIDI controllers? So you could use like generic remote for this. So let's say if I wanted to go to my studio setup, I could click on the plus sign and we could add a generic remote. We would define the inputs and outputs of where our controller is connected. And now if I wanted to do particular functions, I could do a learn and say, okay, I want this function here. And I'll just hit a knob on my controller. Okay, so I will say that function, when I hit play, I want this to go to transport, device, and start. So now when I hit the start button on my controller and then I'll hit apply, it will automatically play. So you could go through and assign just about any function to, so, think of the top information here as what MIDI messages are coming in, and the bottom as to what function those MIDI messages will do. And once you have that set up, you could, export it, save it, and call it up at any time. It'll just be kind of within your project unless you manually delete it. Okay, so we have a question. Is there a way to record the audio coming out of a MIDI track directly into a new audio track without having to bounce? All right, so we'll set up a scenario here. I'll just add an instrument track. So I'll do Doomstrophic, Wonderful Library from Gary Gibbons and Online Music Foundry. Okay, so let's say I wanted to just play that sound and I wanted to record it as audio at once. So if we route it to an output or to a group channel, so I'm going to add a group channel to the selected channels. We'll make it a stereo group. And then I want to add an audio track. And for its input, I want it to be from group 1. So now I could record both these tracks. And I'll just place it into record. And I can record the MIDI. and the audio simultaneously. So once again, you could just route that particular instrument to a group. And I know a lot of people may just have like, groups available in their project so that they could do all of the routing already set up. But again, just take that, route the instrument track to a group channel, to the selected channel, and then the input. Create an audio track and set its audio input as the group channel. And then you can record the MIDI simultaneously without having to bounce. All right, so we see Vic from BFL saying hello from the Poconos in the U.S. importing into U.S. Importing, or should I say playback with MP4 has been challenging. Is there a fix coming? Realize that video files and audio files are kind of two completely different beasts. So it could really depend upon which codec and the container type. So, there's like a myriad of MP4 files. So, but if you wanted to check the codec, if you just search for video support, and this is a pretty typical thing with different video programs, someone will come up with a new codec that can compress the video better, and then everything has to be rewritten to support that. So, but if you go to video support, Nuendo, Cubase, Wavelab, and Dorico, you can now come right over here. And with MP4, just make sure it's an H.263 or an H.264 codec. Check. So within the MP4 container, make sure it's one of those. And there's a number of utility programs, something like Handbrake, that could work with that to convert it. All right. And great to see someone from the Poconos. And I have lots of family near the Poconos. My cousins in Lake Wallenpaupack. I've been on vacation there before. All right. So you see, do I need Cubase Pro from Andy Lane to run Spectral Layers 8 in it? So I think that the artist or the Elements version won't run. I don't think that the Elements version will run the ARA2 extension. So, all right, wonderful to see Sable Winters on the live stream. It's always better when she's on. All right, as well as Jazz Dude. Great to see you. Thanks for all of your efforts. So I see from David Evans, I'll just make sure I have the right question, seeing if he needs to save those settings. I think it might be with the remote control. Yeah, so once you have that set up, it will stick. You could export it if you needed to move to a different program, but if you just go to your studio setup, all of these settings will stick until you physically change it. But you could just simply export it as an XML file, and all that information will be stored as well. But so you don't have to specifically save it. All right, great to see Stefan from Sweden. All right, so we just see from think it's Aristos. Anyone crashing on OTT exit? So I don't have OTT, but you can check out Squasher. It's really good. But sometimes, plugins, may not release memory well. Okay, so a question from Ted Springman. I'm thinking of loading Cubase 11 on my old Windows 7 PC. Will that work okay? So I don't think the new video engine will work on Windows 7, or I think the video will work, but you can't export to video. So we have a lot of people that are still doing it. It's not officially supported because they don't want to go through all, it's since it's not being supported by Microsoft anymore. But there's lots of people that do it, and you can do it in a pinch, but I think you'll be fine. So just realize that if you need to render video or the audio to the video, that function won't work. Okay, so we have a question. I've got to quickly add pads to a client song. I'm a big theory guy, but I know the guitar chords. So how can I get chord pads up and running quickly, making smart chord selections? All right, so if you know what the chords are, it's pretty straightforward. Let's say if I jump to this project. Okay, so if you kind of know what the guitar chords are, you can put them, pretty easily in. So, and if you wanted to, just, enter in the chords, like a lot of times when I do session stuff, I will, just ask for like the chord charts. And this way I have it kind of directly in, in the actual file, so I can see kind of like a horizontal chord chart. If you quickly wanted to add pads to that, if you have so you could manually put the chords in. And once you come over here and say, okay, like this is our chord progression. If you need to copy that data to, later in the time, like many songs will have the chords repeat, you could do stuff like that. And if, we did a modulation, you could just come right over here and do modulations. So those are some easy ways of entering chords. If you have any of the MIDI data, like in this song, I could just say I wanted to go to my project window and I could go to the chord track. And if you have MIDI data, this could automatically make just the chords and lay it out for you. So if I added just a pad sound, and I know Composer does this effectively, where he'll just add an instrument track and he'll put on like just a quick synth pad. So I'll go to High-End Sonic SE. So, and what he does just to kind of fill stuff out is, he'll have the chord track. And then he could have the chords play back. So now without even having to do anything, you could just put a pad in. And just kind of blend that in. So just having a track that's, you could tell the chord track just to play the chords back through a particular track and just assign a pad to it. So without, we take that out, put it back in. Take it out. Just fill out the sound that way quite easily. Okay, so we see from Andy Lane, recommended memory for Cubase. I have 16 gigabytes. Is that enough? You know, Cubase will use whatever memory you have, but it really kind of depends on the projects that you're doing. You know, if you're doing like, 24 tracks or 48 tracks of audio, 16 gigs would be fine. If you're doing, a 3,000 track template for film composition, 16 gigabytes probably wouldn't cut it. But it really kind of depends upon your projects. If you're doing like everything that you see me doing on my system is 32 gigs of memory. My PC laptop that I take for use for demos has 16 gigs and it's worked great for me. All right, wonderful to see John Frost from Massachusetts. All right, and we have DM checking in. All right, and Douglas is saying loop mash is the greatest invention since rocket ships. That's pretty cool. I think rocket ships are cool too. Hi, what is the minimum laptop desktop specification for Cubase DAW? Every edition. So I'll just look at it just to make sure I'm quoting correctly. All right, so we can see, so 64-bit, like Windows 10. So you could do Mojave and higher on Mac. So you need a Rosetta 2 and a Silicone. You need an i series or an AMD Ryzen or an Apple Silicon. i5 or faster. Minimum 4 gigs of RAM. Recommended is 8 hard disk space, 35 gigs. 1440 by 900 for your display resolution. Full 1080p for recommended. You can see the graphics. You need a USB port. So, and so you see, hi Greg, is it possible to address and install both headphone outputs of my UR44C and control room headphones and send different Q mixes to each one? It is, and again, I could see if I could get my UR44 connected for Friday's live stream. I think the interface I have now is just a standard single headphone, but if you go to like the audio hardware under your studio menu, it may show but you would see like the audio settings here for your audio interface, and then that would bring up the controls for the UR44, and then you just need to set the secondary headphones to a bus, and then once that bus is configured, it's routable from the control room. So I could see if I can get my UR44C going for Friday's live stream. If you send me an email to clubcubase@steinberg.de, I could use that on Friday's live stream to show you. So it's just see, does the performance meter average all cores or just the ones being used at that point in time? So it kind of does, I think it does a bit of both, just to kind of give you an idea of how much the processor is being stressed. And, obviously some plugins will be more multi-core savvy than others. So, but I think it just kind of gives you like an overall indication, but it's not going to break it down necessarily by the cores. Okay, so I just see from John Frost, I'm having trouble with Contact 5 loading very slowly and sometimes not letting me add additional libraries for a basic track. Windows 10, Cubase 11, only 8 gigs of RAM. So, depending on what samples that you're using, I know a lot of times, you may, 8 gigs of RAM, if you're doing like a big sample library, that may be a bit... that may be a bit minimal on the RAM. So more RAM could definitely help that. And how you're describing it kind of sounds like it might be a RAM limitation. So, but there might be settings within Contact. I'm not a Contact expert, but I know in Halion that we can actually like play back the track and it could unload or purge all the samples that aren't being used in the project. So it doesn't have to load those up. So you could check that out. See if I'm sure there's a similar function in the in Contact, but I don't have it installed in this computer. All right, so we have someone checking in. Witsky Nobre from Cabo Verde in Africa. Thanks for joining us. Okay, so you see question. Hello, Greg. Cubase 11, Windows 10. Can aftermarket drum samples be imported, dragged into the Groove Agent Simon Phillips kit? So no, it's not when you buy a particular kit like that, you could, it's getting kind of the fixed, it's fixed to the content that's there, but you could, just come over here. So say if I add an instrument track, if I have Groove Agent SE and we load this up, I can load the Simon Phillips kit. Okay, so, at this point, you have 3 snares there. So when you have an acoustic agent kit, it's kind of fixed to the content that comes with it. If we have a beat agent kit, we could drag and drop any, and the intention is that this would, be that complete, that complete context, because like when we hit the snare here, it's doing all of the room and overhead mics and all those samples and the bleeding that's captured into the other microphones. So it's pretty well tied in. So, but if you have just a, so, but, if we have the full Groove Agent, this allows you to not only load up the kit with the pattern, so we can say, let's go to our Simon Phillips Studio Drums. But I could load up a Beat Agent kit here as well. So when I wanted to so at this point I could have, different sounds, and these would be on different MIDI channels from this. So within one instrument I could have, different samples, but since it is a Beat Agent kit, I could take any samples or any audio and just come over and, just drag those particular files and replace them with Beat Agent kits. But the acoustic agent kits are kind of set up where it's going to be, very authentic to the original kit because, it's going to be multi-mic'd, and, the microphones from all the other drum sounds are a part of it, or can be. So that's why it's kind of restricted. One thing on the kicks, though, is on the Simon Phillips is you could assign, there are trigger notes. So if I wanted to assign a trigger, let's say an electro trigger, and I could adjust the trigger level. So if I wanted to blend those, and you could also come here to the trigger level for snares as well. So if you say, okay, I just want it. Let's say a noisy snare. So that way you could adjust kind of the level, but I don't think that these triggers are where you could load in your own samples instead. So, but that may be able to give you a different flavor. Okay, so I just see, is there a way to improve the gain coming out from the stereo out to my monitors? So it could be like you said, if you're going to stereo out of your audio interface. So if you're not getting enough gain, so I would start with your audio interface at 0 dB for the physical outputs. Some people, when they start working, and they go to the mix console here, will utilize kind of, they'll use this as their volume control. If they're, and that's good, but it's, so make sure that, set everything at kind of unity gain on your audio interface and your speakers. And, in Cubase, you could have a control room, and you could configure the control room. If you're in Cubase Pro, you could go to audio connections and go to the control room. And once you have that configured, at this point, you could have a separate monitoring stage that doesn't affect the gain structure of the mix. So you have to figure out if it's a gain structure in the mix. Like if your levels look weak here, it's probably going to not be outputting levels into your audio interface. So make sure that you have these levels. And then if you have Cubase Pro, consider using the control room just as your monitoring source. And this isn't affecting the gain structure of the mix, but just affecting the monitoring volume. But start off with everything, your speakers and your audio interface at unity. And, start from there. All right, great to see you, Randy Lee, in the live stream. Okay, so I see a question from Jeff Zabelski from Chico, California. Hi, Greg. Track has some fader automation on it in a couple of spots. When I try to automate another section with CC 121 and press the right button, the read button is always on. What are our options? So generally by default, if I'm here and I'm adjusting my automation, so let's say, so if I wanted to do automation with my CC 121, it will just kind of, enable and as soon as I, write the automation here, that the read button is turned on, probably assuming that if you're automating something, that you want the automation to play back. So it's kind of the designed behavior. And we used to kind of get criticized because, you could write automation and then you had to go manually turn on for the automation to be read. So that just kind of consolidated that for you, so you wouldn't have to, turn on read automation. So that's kind of the design intention of it. All right, thanks for all the great questions. And if you've learned something new, make sure that you hit the like button. And that if you haven't subscribed to the Cubase YouTube channel, make sure you do that. All right, so we see a question from Tanmay. Great to see you on the live stream. Hey, Greg, can you create a macro which renders the selected track and then disables the track and hides it from the original tracks? Yeah, it's already part of the render in place. So if I select the track here, so let's say I have this piano part. So I'm going to select the track as opposed to the event. I will now come over here. Let's go to my edit menu to render in place, and I'll go to my render settings. And what I want to do is when I have the track selected as opposed to the event, I could now just say remove source tracks. So I'll do this with channel settings. I'll say render. So right now it's going to just render the track in progress, and then it's going to disable it and then just kind of hide that particular track for you, just like that. So at that point, you have everything just kind of rendered just like that. So I don't think you need to do a macro for that. So it's already kind of part of the render in place functionality, Tanmay. Okay, so I just see just a question. Hi, Greg. One question. I think that was earlier, but I must ask. It's about headroom of the mix. How to get loud mix. People have limiters into buses, and there's saturation. I need your opinion. So it could really depend. I try not to do things the same way, and I think every song, every mix is kind of a different entity. So a lot of people will just kind of, in their master fader put on, one thing that I think a lot of people do kind of erroneously, and it might just be kind of my workflows, is people could load up their master fader with a bunch of mastering type plugins, and they put limiters and expanders and maximizers, and they're mixing with that on. And some people can get great results with that and can work with the system. I think that if you try to get your mix sounding great and loud, and free of harmonic clashes, free from stuff that's fighting frequencies, frequencies are clashing, and stuff that's arranged well, that you can get a loud mix without doing that. And then when you do that at the very end, that you could even take it to the next level. But I think a lot of people kind of cheat by going straight for the master bus processing, and you're kind of mixing to that. You're not necessarily mixing for the song, but you're mixing to your master bus processing. And it's, I think it's kind of cheating yourself, that you're often better off. And I've been in the studio with, incredibly famous mix engineers when they've gotten the call and said, from a mastering engineer, it's like, hey, I think you could get this one a little better. And, did you mix with this plugin in the master bus? Or, yeah, it's like, taking our stab at it. And I think you could do it without that plugin in the master bus. And then, I'll be able to kind of work with it. So that's kind of my thoughts on it, but others may disagree. All right, so just see, how do you keep all applications visible on screen? So I'm not sure if it's like switching between different projects. I could just go to the Windows menu, but applications, if you hold down Alt Tab or Control Tab on Mac, you could just simply come over here and switch between the active program. Both operating systems kind of work the same way, but let me know if I'm misunderstanding the question, Wayne. All right, great to see Luca joining us. Okay. All right, so you see a question. How to transpose chord pads entry from C1, C2 MIDI to C4, C5 MIDI on my keyboard, not the voicing. Okay, so let's say okay, so let's look at our chord pads. Okay, so now I could trigger the chords just by playing these particular notes. I think Tame wants to change the notes, so let's see if we could get that set up. Not sure if that's fixed or not off the top of my head. Okay, so I think if we go to pads range start, let's see if we could, yeah, so just come here. Okay, so now my chords would be triggered from there. So go to the settings cogwheel. and then the pad remote. And then you can see the pads remote range start and remote range end. And you could just adjust there to C4 through B4 or whatever you want. So question, when I activated drum map on a MIDI track and edit a clip, I cannot seem to select all the notes like I do in a piano roll. Command/Control plus click on the note to the left. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a quick look. Okay, so I'll just come over here. Let's activate. Okay, so we have the drum map here. All right, so let's see if we can. So it's just shift double click. So you don't need to hold the command. And if you just shift double click from the first note, it'll select all the notes on that particular, from that point on. So shift double click in the drum editor, and then that will select all the notes of the same pitch on the same track. So just shift and no command or control plus shift. And our question in the drum editor, also drawing velocity automation with a triangle sine wave seems to glitch out on drum map tracks. So I think if you just hold down the shift key as you do this, that you can just have the velocities kind of scale directly like that. So I'm just going to hold down the shift key. And let's say I just want to set the frequency here. So just once the frequency is set with the shift key, and then you could just let go, and then it looks like that kind of functions as expected right there. So let me know if you're doing something different, Luca. Okay, so just see, hey Greg, how should I go about making an orchestral template for a laptop? The sample libraries take up too much memory. So that's why you don't see a lot of heavy duty film composers doing stuff on laptops. But one thing that you could do, is as you build up a template, one thing that a lot of people are kind of, perhaps migrating to is just, setting up your template and then not having all the tracks active So we'll show you here. So okay, so you may have a template loaded up here. So let's say, but let's say I'm not using any of the strings or brass now. So if I come here, you could just have all of the tracks disabled, and that will unfree it from your processor and from RAM. And then you say, oh, now I need to use a string bass. At that point, I could just enable one track at a time. So if you have limited resources, consider just, enabling or disabling tracks as you're using them instead of having them all take up memory and your processing power if they're being used or not. So just a right click on the tracks and enable, disable tracks. See if that works. So just see, hi, I'm looking forward to buy Cubase 11 Elements, and later on I want to buy the Artist Upgrade. Is it possible, right? Or am I going to have to pay full price again? No, once you kind of have your elements, you could, jump up to Cubase Artist and you get an upgrade discount, or you could jump up to Cubase Pro from your artist and you get a discount. So you never kind of start from scratch once you're kind of in the Cubase family. So you just see any word on Halligan 7 features release date. I haven't really heard of anything. I know that the team's been busy on a lot of stuff, but nothing that's been announced yet. But I'm sure that they're proactively working on stuff. So you just see question, Greg, I added plugins like Halligan Full from Download Assistant when downloaded Cubase 11 Pro, not realizing it needed paid license. How do I remove it? So not asked where my license when load Cubase, so you could uninstall it. But another trick you could do is if you go to the Steinberg library manager, and then let's say if we go, to your Halligan content here, you could, and this is just utility to manage all the content. So these are just like, look for the content. You'll probably see the list that pops up saying, oh, you don't have a license for this, like Anima, Aron, Bebox, Eagle, some of those other ones that are set, with Halligan, and you could just go into the Steinberg library manager and be able to remove them from there. Or you could just purchase the full version of Halligan as well. That's another way. All right, so we have a question. How do you select particular notes in the key editor by using logical editor? For example, I want to select every 2 to 3 notes in a bar. Okay, so let's say if I want to get to the violin part here, let's say I want to select every 3rd note. So I'll go to my logical editor. I may have a preset because I've done this a lot. I'll just build it from scratch again. All right, so I want to select under function, and we're going to say type is equal to notes. Then we'll say last event is equal to event counter, and I'll say 3. So now I'll hit apply if I did it correctly. Oh, let's say. Okay, so I'm going to say every other event rather. Event counter 3. Okay, so select under function, type is equal to note, which is the default stating for the default status for the filter target. Last event, every other event, event counter, and then 3. So now I do this. Every other third note should be selected, as we could see. So if we undo that, and then if you want, you could say, you know, I want to do that. I want to select every other third note and take the velocity and add 30. So if I was just looking at the velocities here, that way every third note will have the velocity added. So, but once again, select, type is equal to notes, last event, every other event, event counter, and type in 2 if you want every other note, type in 3 for every third note, 4 for every fourth note. You see people are missing Michael with his ice cream, so maybe he'll be joining us later. So question, when I work in Melodyne 5, you can repitch samples from a chord track. What ways could you scan samples performances from Melodyne and add them to your chord track? So I don't think that functionality is possible. So that functionality, I'm not a Melodyne expert, but I don't believe it exists because it's not integrated with the chord track in Cubase. So I don't think that works, you know, and it's... So, but you know, maybe if Melodyne wanted to do that, they could. I'm sure they could extract information from the chord track and do it. But I don't think it's the actual that functionality exists. And there's some limitations, obviously, with what you could do with ARA2. All right, wonderful to see Jay from Connecticut. Let me see, Jeff Sabelski says, it blows my mind that all of you are from all over the world, so that's great. All right, just find my place in the chat. So I just see, hey Greg, do you have a recommendation for coloring Very Audio based on the key of the song rather than pitch or chord track? So if you're doing it on the chord track, so I'll show the different options. So I mean, you could tell which is in key and out of key, which is probably the important thing that you want to accomplish. You know, kind of, let's say the end goal. I'll just revert this quickly. All right, so if I have, let's say my chord track here. Okay, so now I choose the color scheme based on the chord track. So, you know, I can see that red is out of key, you know, so blue and green are in key. So, you know, so I know there's two different colors, but, you know, it's pretty easy to see, you know, so, so if you set, you know, so you want it to be based on the key of the song rather than pitch or chord track, you know. So all you have to do is if you don't have, you know, if you deleted all of the, you know, if you deleted all of the chords and just added a key. So let's say if I'm here, so I mean, so it's not necessarily, you know, so if you don't necessarily populate the chord track, but let me see if I could. Keep the key defined. So it doesn't look like I can have the key without a chord, but you know, it's only going to be two colors that show within the key. So you could just add one chord if you don't want to necessarily see within the chord track, but I think it makes a lot of sense to see it in context of the chords. So I see, hello, Cubase crew. Does anyone know how I can drag the arrangement screen from the keyboard instead of pressing the middle mouse buttons? I think that there's, so I think if you wanted to kind of mimic like this behavior, let's see if there's a, I thought that there was kind of a keyboard shortcut for that. Let me just see if I can find it quickly. To see if I can find this. And probably someone could look on cubaseindex.com because I think we covered this before. Let me just. Okay, so try just if you use the mouse scroll wheel, So if this is what you want to do, use the mouse scroll wheel and hold down the shift key, and then you could kind of move back and forth. So let me know if that's what you want to do. So if you wanted to drag the arrangement screen using a key command. So I'm not sure if there's just a key command for that, but it's pretty elegant and handy. And you don't have to hold down the middle mouse key with that. Okay, so I just see from Jay, I'm preparing to send my nephew, a high school senior pianist, an M1 Mac Mini. I've not dealt with Mac in approximately 10 years. Do you enjoy any particular QWERTY keyboards, mice, or audio gear for your Mac? I like I don't like the Apple Magic Mouse. It has problems with lots of programs being kind of too sensitive and kind of clicking in the wrong, selecting the wrong area. I always like having a numeric keypad on my computer keyboard, especially, so if you're not limited to a laptop size, get one with with the numeric keypad because it gives you a lot more buttons to push. If you're looking for like an audio interface, check out like a UR22C is a great interface that has USB 3 connections and that would be just a great little setup. So I use just like a generic Logitech mouse often. So I currently have just a VSSO Plur mouse, which allows me to switch between 3 different computers, but just kind of a generic optical mouse, and it works great. But even inexpensive Logitech mouse I've found has always worked great. All right, so we have a question. If I have 3 tracks, for example, and I want to automate them all at the same time via the same controller, is that possible? So, all right, so let's jump to another project here. So, if the controls are, it depends on if you want it to have one knob that's controlling multiple devices. So let's say if I select all of these tracks here and I go to my mix console and I have these set to quick link. Now if I want to take all my drums, I can move one fader on my CC121 and all of them are linked and can all move and be automated. So if you link, just do a quick link, you could have that quick link control whatever channels are selected and automate that as well. So I just see from Felix Mokia Beats, how much does it cost? So I'm not sure if it's Cubase you're asking for. Okay, so I see Cubase. So, you could go to steinberg.net. I'm not sure what country you're in. So, but you could just look there and you could get the cost in your local country. I don't want to be the American that assumes everyone lives in America. All right, so question. Could you show some tips and shortcuts to write automation fast, mouse plus keyboard? Okay, so let's say if I'm here and I just wanted to automate. So let's say if I'm on this particular channel and I hit W to enable automation, I could just move. And I'll just rewind just a little bit, and everything I just did is completely automated. So again, just move my automation there. If I select this track, click on W, automate it. So that's pretty fast. You know, you could use control surfaces. You could also just use the mouse scroll wheel on top of faders. And if you wanted to hold down the shift key, you can get fine control without the shift key. You can get kind of typical or more of a, you know, macro control, or shift would be more of a micro fine or fine control with that. Okay, so you see Tame says, I meant with the event selected instead of the track selected for render in place. And I think this was the disable. So sometimes, you know, building macros that allow you to do, you know, macros will execute a particular function. And if the function can take, and for the next, so let's say if I did a render in place, and then and then disabled the track, it's going to be doing the render in place, and that time could be variable. So if you want it to have a macro with that, the macro command would be executed before the track would be rendered. So you'd have to kind of do it manually. So there really isn't a macro for events to have the part, disabled for you, but you could, maybe set up, you could also in the project logical editor hide tracks that are disabled as well. All right, so just see, is there, are there other Cubase versions? Can I find a cheaper one? So, if you get an audio interface, like even a Steinberg interface, you get a copy of Cubase AI included with that free. So if you get like a UR22C or something like that, that would work great. If you, there is a Cubase Elements, which in the US sells for around $99. I think Cubase Artist is a mid-range, might be like $349-ish and $579-ish for the Cubase Pro. But again, you could check with the Steinberg online shop in your country or a local dealer. All right, great to see that Mark Rabin's able to join us from Montana. Hi, when I do a cycle record, the previous recordings are still hearable in preference. There's a tape style recording option to only monitor your recordings. So I'm not sure if it's, it sounds like it's probably a MIDI. So let me just come over here. Let's jump back to another project. All All right, so let's say if I'm here and I have an electric piano. Okay, so I'm going to go to my MIDI record modes. So if I just wanted to come here, here you could choose to do, if you want to do stacked, let me just reread it. Okay, when I do a cycle recording, the previous recordings are still hearable. So if you wanted to just set this to new parts, so let's say I'll just do like a one measure recording. All right, so just hit the same note. The next note, I'll come over here. All right, let me just check my. Okay, so let me try it with stacked. I'll just hit one note here. So now when we play it back, it'll only play back. I'll go back to the A. And now to the F. So try switching your MIDI record modes here to stacked and see if that will do it. And if you're recording audio, let us know as well. Okay, reading through comments. All right, so I just see, does Cubase shows what chords or scale to play like live as I've seen on YouTube. So if you want to see kind of what, chords you're playing, so say in the MIDI editor, if you come over here and enable the status line as you play chords. Or let's just say as I'm recording, we can see right up here that's just going to show me the chords. So, but if you wanted you also have the scale assistant option where you could set the key here, and if you want it to just make sure I'm but within the MIDI editor, you could also just come over here and define a scale. So you say, okay, I want to be in D major. You could also hide notes, show pitches only from D major. So as you draw notes in, it will not allow you to draw notes that are out of key. So you have the scale assistant as well. Um, and if you also on the with the scales, you could come over here and just have Cubase do a scale suggestion for you. So, you know, if you played something in, let's see if I have like just some MIDI here. So if we played something in, we can go to the scale assistant and you could have Cubase just automatically come up with scale suggestions for you. Okay, so a question from Renee. Can you record with a sample track as a separate window and not as a windows under the project windows? All right, so let's say if I have a sampler track. So I'll go ahead and just solo this particular. So it looks like you can record. So the sample track is a separate window. So I see Tamay's comment about the GUI error that's annoying him with the folder track. So I'll make sure to pass it on. Unfortunately, I don't write the code, but I've passed it on in the past and we'll do it again. Okay, so I just see I'm a total beginner, so I'm still learning the basics. When I added all the audio tracks and played them, the cursor suddenly started to move frantically. It happens every time I hit play. I don't know why. So, you know, if you're doing a lot of different tracks, you know, it could be maybe the zoom level. So let's say if I'm just open up a kind of a larger project here. So if you have the cursor kind of, you know, maybe the zoom. So if you're seeing something like that, maybe just hit the G key and see if that, you know, maybe it's your zoom factor that's doing it. But if you could give us some more information, that'd be helpful. Okay, so I see, does anyone make custom chord pad presets, and anyone have any idea how to take a piano audio and figure out the chords exactly with voicing? I tried with ears, but it's tedious. Maybe Cubase has a feature. So Cubase doesn't really have a feature for audio, for for working, for determining chords from audio. It could still be a bit hit or miss with a lot of algorithms. So, but nothing currently in Cubase that allows you to do that. See, Jeff Sabelski's the shift plus double click is a new one for him in the drum editor. All right, so we're about an hour and 36 minutes into the Hangout, and I'm at about 2 hours and 6 minutes into questions. Just as a quick reference, I'm about 30 minutes behind the live questions. I'll try to catch up. Okay, so I see a question from Jay. Has there been much community discussion reflecting demand of regions, bottom, left, right, being able to detach in pop out to other monitors, which we may see in a coming release? So the bottom monitors, the bottom zone can be detached out already. If you're doing media bay can, in the control on the right zone, the media bay can be detached already. So just if you don't know this, I think just hitting F3 would automatically detach the mix console. And if you have that set to go to a secondary display, that would do that. If we go to a sample editor, we could change the preferences here under preferences to editor. So when you say double click, we could send to the editor in a window. So now if I double click, it's going to open in its own sample editor window, and that will open in its last state. So if that's on a separate monitor, you could do that. So, check this preference. And if you want it to double click, will open in the lower zone, or double click will open it in a separate window. You can just set that, or if you use key commands, you could set it. So it kind of works that way already. Okay, so we see in drum editor, if you have a drum fill, if you have a drum fill, the drummer rushed, is there a way to select all the notes and maybe drag to the right so the fill sound doesn't change, but it's just played slower? So sometimes what you could do is, I'll just create a new project here. Or I'll just take one of our. Probably be faster to take it from this project. All right, so let's say if I'm playing this. All right, so let's say I did like the worst drum fill of all time going in. So, what a lot of people can do once you're here, we could just select these particular notes. And if you wanted to quantize based on, you could move them in time. I could quantize these to separate values. So let's say, okay, I wanted to quantize these to eighth note triplets. And let's say, okay, quantize. So these are still at their original values. Those will be quantized to eighth note triplets. If you wanted to take those particular notes that are selected, we could go into like a logical editor. And I could say, we'll select our notes and adjust their position. And we can say multiply by 2. I think there might be a preset here that. So I could also just come here and let's say half tempo for those particular functions. So I could do a half tempo or a double tempo from logical editor presets. So those are a couple things, but once they're in MIDI, you can kind of change it, with a lot of flexibility. So a couple of different options there. All right, so we see from Christian D68 that shift double click is now my top 10 tips of the day from the drum editor. So glad we could teach you something new. All right, hi, if I open key commands, it doesn't show me the macro tab. Can I fix that? So it may not show you macros until you've created macros. So if you haven't created, but let's see if we see show macros. Let me just see. So if I open key commands, it doesn't show me the macro tab. So it could be, try, depending on your screen resolution, if it's like I'm running a 1920 by 1080, but maybe try resizing and see if you show the macros, depending on your screen resolution. Maybe it's off screen. So try maybe to resize vertically and see if that does a trick for you. All right, question from Korean Jesus. Is it possible to control multiple instruments with a single MIDI track? Okay, so let's come over here to new project. Okay, so we could do this from a MIDI track. If we start from a MIDI track, here's kind of an easy way to do it. So I'll come to my VST instruments and I'll add it as an instrument rack. So let's say I'll do a Halion Sonic SE. All right, so let's say. And let's say I will add a pad shop. All right, so if I wanted to kind of layer all these going on, so I could just come over here to, so if I play back, I have that sound, I'll have, and let's say another kind of brass. Let me just switch out that sound and get something a little different. All right, so now if I wanted to take this, we could go to, and you have to kind of start this from a MIDI track if you wanted to do this, but you could also just go to your MIDI sends and say, okay, I want to send this to Pad Shop, and I want to send this instrument to Retrolog. So now I could play back kind of all three instruments. And then if I wanted to put like just an arpeggiator on the Retrolog instrument, you know, alternatively, you could, you know, add 3 instrument tracks and put them all into a folder. You know, a lot of people will do this. Move selected tracks to the folder and say synth layer. And then just play that particular folder track. So once you have that, then all 3 tracks within that could be done within the synth layer. I just see, hi Greg, is there any sound effects content for Cubase? So I know that with Nuendo, because it's kind of more geared toward, that's more geared, you know, for post-production and sound design, that there's a game sound effects library and just a normal sound effects library, but none that come with Cubase. Sorry about that. Okay, Greg, is there a way to get Scale Assistant kind of feature in Cubase 10.5? The Scale Assistant is just the rebranded follow chords feature that already existed. So maybe you can suggest that until GUI and 11 fix. So the Scale Assistant is a lot more than just the follow chords feature. So I don't think that they're going to be doing any more development on version 10.5. All right, so we see that Michael Teams has joined the live stream. It's probably a long time ago, but wonderful to have you, Michael. Michael wants everyone to whack the like button. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, make sure you do that as well. All right, so I just see, Greg, can you do a masterclass on Logical Editor? I've tried to use it, but never am successful, and I'm sure many are not familiar with it. So yeah, I'll try to get one prepared. Work's been kind of busy to take. I know I promised one, so I'll try to get one maybe early in September when things kind of settle down with some work projects. But if you have particular things in a logical editor, email me what you want to do, Tanmay. Okay, so just see from Korean Jesus, I had a question about the groove agent symbols. Seems to be two types. Anyone point me in the words to Google to learn about the question? So it could be that there are, I'm not sure what symbols you're talking about, but there are beat agents, which are more kind of MPC paradigm where you could drag kits, and acoustic agents where it's going to be kind of a fixed drum kit. So maybe those are the two symbols that you're talking about. Okay, so you just see a question. How do I change the inspector parameter for multiple tracks at the same time? Alt plus Shift doesn't work anymore. So usually from the inspector, Alt plus Shift will often do it for stuff kind of related to the mix console, but it may not be related to all of the parameters in the inspector. So most of the parameters in the inspector are designed to work on independently and to be set independently per tracks. Some functions where it makes a lot of sense is like, with the chord tracks, being able to say follow the chord track or don't follow the chord track, that could work globally. But most functions by default for a lot of the parameters will just, depending on what parameter it is, may not be designed to work like in a linked manner. All right, so I just see from Tanmay how to get and use the articulations under menu, like the velocity submenu and the MIDI editor that you showed for select every third note. I've never seen it before. So it really depends on, so let's say if I'm here and I have some MIDI notes drawn in. So the articulations are articulation maps. So, but if you just select from velocity, if you just select articulations and symbols, you'll see those appear. So, and if you have an expression map loaded for this particular instrument, all of its articulations would then become available. Okay, so we just see a question. What is the difference between drawing out MIDI data like expression and dynamics in the editor and in the arrangement screen? What is the need of the extract MIDI data option? Okay. Okay, so a lot of times, it's going to be just two different ways of working. So, many people that have been doing MIDI since before virtual instruments, their whole world will be kind of like, drawing in MIDI CCs. So they'll have modulation, they'll have expression, and let's say volume and velocity. So this is a pretty typical setup for composers. So at this point, we could say, I wanted to draw in my CC data, or I've written it in with the fader or my MIDI controller. And so a lot of people who didn't have an option of tying it to automation prefer kind of doing it in the edit screen. If I wanted to, kind of do similar things, I could say, okay, I just wanted to come here and say modulation. So at this point, I could draw in, MIDI CC automation, my data here as part of the project window. So it used to be that this was easier to copy across multiple tracks. That was kind of resolved in Cubase 11. So it's really just kind of maybe a perspective of a personal workflow choice. All right, and let me just see if I can remember where the okay, what is the need of the extract MIDI data option? Let me just take a look, see if I can remember where that is. All right, so you see that the extract MIDI automation kind of turned our modulation that we had set here as MIDI CC data, and then extracted that as automation data. So when we come here, you see that this change should now be applied here, I believe. So we can see that those will be the same. So as we make changes here, that can automatically be updated. So if you needed to migrate from working in MIDI CCs to automation, you could do that with that particular function. Hi, I'm wondering if Cubase have any auto-tune function for vocals. Yeah, it sure does. So you could come over here if you want to do, there's two different tools for that. So if you wanted to do like a quick, fast, automatic pitch correction, there's going to be a tool as a plugin that you could go under pitch shift and go to pitch correct. And here we could say, okay, I wanted to go to G major. And I wanted the correction. So you could do that. And if you want to do like very kind of processed, you could do that. Or if you want to be natural, you can make adjustments there. And then we also have as part of the sample editor where you could have Vary Audio. So when you come over here to Vary Audio, that you could graphically edit the pitch of vocals and adjust the vibrato and different information for tuning. So you have a plugin, kind of like what a lot of people consider auto-tune, or if you want a more graphical editing approach, you have that with Vary Audio, and those are standard in Cubase. The Vary Audio is in Cubase Artist and Cubase Pro. All right, so to see, does anyone know if in the drum editor, the snap resolution for all the notes can be quickly changed? For example, switching all notes from 16th to 16th note triplets. I think we looked at this in the last live stream, and I couldn't figure out a way to do it. But I mean, you could quantize to, different values. But as you kind of draw it in, you'd have to, I believe, change them one at a time. Sorry about that. All right, so as I see urgently, I can't connect my guitar to Cubase AI 11 help. So, probably what you need to do is to connect it into your audio interface. Go to your audio interface. Make sure that Cubase is looking to your audio interface. If you go to Studio menu to Studio Setup, you'll see your audio system. Make sure that you have your particular audio interface defined there. You need to tell Cubase will by default to make it like a stereo in and a stereo out to make sure that you have your inputs of your audio interface connected here. So you probably, if you have like a 2 in, 2 out interface, which is pretty typical, you can have, my guitar is plugged into input 1 or 2. You need to make sure that you add an audio track. You wanted to tell it's probably going to be a mono track since it's your guitar, and you tell it what input that you're using for that instrument. And then you need to give the track a name. So we'll call it guitar because this will be the name of the audio file. Make sure that you record, enable, and monitor, and then you should be all set to record. Feel sad reading all the descriptions of Mark Rabin's studio that flooded, so it's horrible. I was just talking to a friend who went through Hurricane Michael, I believe, in Florida. Lost a lot of stuff in his studio. It's horrible. So I see a question. Can a non-trained person use Cubase to record music, dialogues, narration? So yeah, we have, millions of people that are not trained that record every day and do, huge records and no problem. I see from Randy Lee, what is that song? I dig it. So if it's kind of the hard rock track, it might be a song called Hit the Road, which is done, Fred Corey lent it to me. I think it was done with maybe the guitarist and singer from Talus as well. But if it's in our song, let me know. All right, so we see Soren from Sweden checking in. All right, so I just see from Randy Lee, will my Tascam US 2400 work as a controller? May have asked before. So as long as if it works via USB, as long as it still has a USB driver, how the US 2400 works is basically you would configure it as 3 Mackie controls. So you just come over here, go to Mackie control, and then for each bank of 8, they operate as 3 Mackie controls. You pick one as kind of the master layer, and then the others as Mackie control extensions. All right, great to see Graham Witcher in the live stream. Thanks for joining us. All right, great to see JVI able to join us. Hope you're doing well. All right, so I see, are there any tools to constrain pencil tool when drawing automation manually? So let's say if we have automation, so I'm not sure any tools to constrain, but there are line tools as well that a lot of people may not be aware of. So if you wanted to, just do a straight fade out, you could also just come over here and, if you wanted to, let's say, okay, I just wanted to come with my range tool. A lot of people miss this. And if you want to do fades like that, so it's not necessarily the pencil tool, but you could do some more automation editing like that. And if you hover in the center, you could do your Bezier curves. If you wanted to, you could double click and put a new point in. So if you wanted to adjust the curves, you could do that as well. But and if you wanted to do also, parabola for automation curves, and you could hold down kind of the shift key to set the frequency if you wanted to just change that. So if you wanted to be, so let me know if that works for you. All right, just trying to find my spot. Thanks for all the great questions. If you've learned something, make sure that you hit the like button. All right. So I see a point that JVI brought up, and I'll show it for other people as well. Says Greg, I was watching an older Club Cubase video where you right-clicked an audio event and got a huge menu I didn't have. So, and there's two options. So when you right-click, you get kind of the tools, or we could get it, and you could toggle this in preferences, or if you hold Control and click, that you could get kind of context-sensitive functions plus your tools here as well. So if you don't know that, but if you wanted to always change that preference, go to editing to tools and show toolbox on right click. If you uncheck that, so now when you right click, you'll have access to all of your tools available and more context sensitive functions. So you say, okay, I just want to come here and I just wanted to render in place. I wanted to bounce the selection. I wanted to do processes. You could do that. So it's a cool workflow thing. Right. See, Michael Teams is giving out his ice cream. He has a limited time in the live stream today. All right, so I just see hi on my MacBook Pro. I can't the CR controls. So I'm going to say I can't use the CR controls. So make sure that if you go to your audio connections, that you have the control room activated. So if you disable it, it's not going to show up, but you have to go to the audio connections, click on a control room tab, and make sure that's turned on, and then make sure that you have the appropriate routing for that as well. All right, so to see from Jazz Dude, message to Steinberg, get rid of F1 for help in internet and map the lower zone on or off to F1. So I think that might be kind of tied to getting logoed to be, a Windows or a Mac program. I think that's one of those like little, perhaps dated requirements. But we used to get, in the old days, we would get, so much flack for not having F1 for help. So I think if you wanted to be officially, put a Mac or Windows 10 logo on your box, you need to have the F1 go to help. That may have changed, but at one point that was the case. All right, great to see that Gareth has made the live stream. Hi, Greg. Is there a way to substitute a stored onboard PDF manual instead of the online Steinberg site? So I just always download the manual, so when I go to, so if I don't want it to go to the site, I'll just go to Steinberg Cubase 11 manual, and there will be like two different versions. So if when you go to Steinberg help, there will be kind of like the online version. I'm still maybe a bit old school, and I'll do the PDF version. And then this is like, the PDF version of what would be kind of the traditional printed manual. And this is, like 1,200 pages. So I would go to the PDF version and just download that file and just keep it on your computer. I don't think it'll link when you hit F1 to go to the PDF, because probably like the operating system logoed requirements, but you could always just have the PDF manuals on local to your machine. So I see, is there any other way to separate vocals from an instrumental in Cubase 10.5 apart from using spectral layer? So if you upgrade it to Cubase 11, it will come with spectral layers 1, which will allow you to separate the vocals from from an audio file. So you could separate the instrument, but if you had the full spectral layers, you could do that, but you could probably save money if that's the only function that you want, and get a bunch of other killer stuff that came in Cubase 11 as well. Okay, so question from Jay. Still dialing best colors for eyes. However, I always forget what the color guides are referring to in the screen. Any chance Steinberg would add an image with arrows pointing to what their labels are supposed to be describing? So I'll pass that on. It may not hit like the highest priority of, getting, lots of features that people want, but I'll definitely kind of pass it along. All right, we see Jeff Sabelski loves Apache 5. See Jeff Sabelski saying you just got an Amazon Fire 10 tablet to read manuals. So yeah, I have all my manuals on my Kindle as well. So planes and late night reading. Okay, so I just see my projects are in external hard drives, but plug-in installations on internal. I'm paranoid. Must buy another external hard drive to back up installations. Depending upon your licensing scheme, I think most people would have all of their programs and plugins on an internal drive and their projects on a separate drive, like their audio. Depending on your plugins, it's common to have, like, if you use a utility for your plugins, if there's lots of samples and lots of content, to have like I have a 2 terabyte SSD that's just strictly for samples, and all it does is samples. And so like my virtual instruments that have large libraries, I could just do all the samples and have them play directly from there. So I think that makes sense, but I don't think you have anything to worry about if it's like, VST effects and stuff like that. I wouldn't worry about it. All right, great to see that Millard Brown is made to live stream, and you don't have to worry about detention, so no tardy slips. But one more time, I'll tell your parents. Okay, so we have a question from James Water Jr. Can you bounce to MP3? Is there another app or converter to purchase to Cubase 11 Pro? All you have to do is go to Export, Audio Mixdown, and File Type. Switch this from WAV to MP3. Choose the name of the MP3 file, and then the path that you want it to go, and then it'll export that. So you don't have to buy a separate program. Just choose the file type here to MPEG 1 layer 3. Okay, so I see, are the effects channels supposed to boost the gain on vocals? How do you get the initial volume back? Or what the proper way to add an effects channel to a vocal? Okay, so I'll revert this. Okay, so generally the effects don't change gain. It might make it a little softer, maybe just the nature of the effect. So I will come here. I have an effects channel. I'll delete this for demonstration purposes. Okay, so let's say I want to take my vocal file. So I'm going to select the track. and I say right click, add effects channel to selected channels. Let's add, let's say, a reverb. So now that's automatically going to do all the routing for you. And so if I wanted to bypass the effects, we'll see there's a gain. So sometimes the reverb can make it sound a little quieter because it's kind of spreading the sound, but it shouldn't make it louder by default.
So afraid to smile, you think that I change my mind. I can't forget.
So just try to right click on the vocal track and add effects in, or you could go to the sends itself on a particular track and right click and add effects channel to send 2 through 8 to any particular send. All right. Can I use an question? Can I use an SSL UF8 at the same time as Stream Deck? Sure. You can use multiple controllers in Cubase without any issues. So if you want to run that and a CC121 and a Stream Deck and a Mackie control and the UF8, no problem. So they will all kind of work together. So you could run multiple control surfaces in your Cubase setup without issues. Okay, so we just see how to use punch locators correctly. What tasks are they intended for? All right, so it used to be that our, like we could come over here. If I wanted to do a punch in of a particular word, I could come right here. Let me just take my snap off by hitting the letter J. So let's say I wanted to, like the singer just messed this word up, and I could come right over here and I could set the in and out point using the left and right locators. Then if I hit I and O on the computer keyboard as we would play, it would now go in and record and then go out of record. All right, but sometimes, if we're just doing like one little small word, we may want to give the singer a little more context. And this is where the punch points could come in handy. So if I wanted to set up my punch locators, I could come over here to the transport menu to punch points. And we'll say set punch points based on selection range. So now I could move the left and right locators independently. So as we go back to our locators, I'll play. It's just going to punch in now. It'll go out of punch. Then it'll cycle back. Oh, if I enable cycle, that would help. Sorry. So I'll turn on cycle. So now when we get to the punch points, it'll punch in there. Punch out. Cycle back. So it allows you to have the punch in and punch out decoupled or separated and independent from the loop. So it could help giving the singer a little more context for what's coming, to have them sing along for a measure or a couple beats right before the actual punch occurs. Thanks again for all the wonderful questions. All right, so I just see from Mark Rabin. I hope Greg does some in-depth with punch in, punch out. I saw orange markers once. Now they're always gray, blue. Not sure how I got the orange ones. So the orange ones, interestingly, are like we have our left locator and let's say our right locator. So this is the beginning and the end, but we could actually reverse those. So that's why you may see the locators. So if I come here, we could just say exchange left and right locators. So that could reverse that. Now, once we have, and that turns it orange. Now, once this is active, if you're in cycle mode, you can play the song and it will skip. So you could just skip that particular section of the song without listening to it. So before you do an edit, you're like, oh, what if we dropped these 2 bars at the end of this particular project? It just means that the left and right locators have been reversed. And when cycle mode is activated and you play over it, it's just going to skip that defined region. So before you do an edit and, do all that, you could just audition it pretty easily. And that's why you see the orange left and right locators, because they are reversed. All right, so we have Score of Doom saying hi from Russia. Thank you for joining us. It's always fascinating to see people from all over the world on the live streams. Makes it interesting for me. Okay, so I see, what are you using to capture your screen and audio from Cubase and your voice at the same time? So my setup is I have a Steinberg UR24C interface, and that's what my Cubase is communicating with and sending audio to. The audio output of that goes into a Yamaha USB mixer. I think it's an MW12CX. It's kind of a typical Yamaha license plate name for a product. But it's basically a mixer with USB out, and my microphone is going into that same mixer. This allows me to have, and I kind of use OBS to take the audio, and then OBS is looking for the audio from the mixer, and that goes directly to the live stream. So that way I could, mute the microphone if I have to cough or my son knocks on the door, or I need to change sample rates. I don't have to do any weird configuration. So it's basically one interface for Cubase, one for the live stream. And I found that's been incredibly reliable over the years. Okay, so I see a question. Can we split keyboard while using chord pads? So, if you have the chord pads available, you can, as we showed a bit earlier, we could see kind of the range of, so let's say if I just want it to, come right over here. So now if I wanted to play the chord pads, we could choose to just have this automatically, trigger the chord pads here, but I'm not sure what you mean, but we could set the range of the chord pads. So I think I still have my chord pads project might still be open. So, you know, now if I just wanted to play so you could do that. But if you go to the settings, you could set the range. You could also say, okay, I want these chords to be, you know, my player remote control, so my pad layout. So there's a lot of different settings that you could use to kind of choose what actual chords, what the keys are doing. But if you could let me know, maybe with a little more detailed about split keyboard when using chord pads. But once you have the keyboard set up, you could just use this octave to play the chord pads and play other notes and other parts directly there. So if that's what you mean by split, you could do it quite easily. Okay, so question. Converting a project from 96 kilohertz to 44.1 kilohertz sample rate. When I do that, I get some distorted Vox. Is there something to do to avoid that, Greg? So most of the time, the sample rate conversion's been pretty good. So I'm not sure if it's... So if you had an example that you could let me hear on the distortions, I'm not sure if it's like an algorithm, like the sample rate conversion that's done that. I know that, you know, Cubase has, you know, some really high quality sample rate conversions, and sometimes you may lose a little bit, but it shouldn't be doing, it shouldn't be distorting the vocals during the algorithm change. Also, you know, if you're doing it and if you have effects on it, you know, if you do the sample rate conversion independent before the effects, that would be more ideal because it'll give you less variables. Question, is there a way to save the groove from a sample so I don't have to zoom in and add MIDI that way? All right, so let's say if I like the groove of this particular loop, this audio file, and I wanted to apply the feel, the groove of that into a MIDI part, all I'd have to do is we'll double click, go into our hit points. We'll have Cubase kind of determine the hit points here, and we could adjust the sensitivity if you want. If you're so inclined, we could manually add points. And right from here, you'll see create groove. Once we've done that, it'll now show up as a quantized preset. So if I come here, all right, I'll just split. Let me just turn snap on. Sorry about that. So once I have, let's say, a bunch of MIDI notes here, I could just come right over here. And now when I go to quantize it, I choose that as the quantize preset and hit Q. And then those two, that MIDI would line up without you having to zoom in and manually match. You can still do that if you get paid by the hour, and that's a good thing. So. Okay, so we see a question from Jan. Is it possible to colorize all A chords in the chord track, an event with specific name in a logical editor? If possible, what approach idea would Greg take? All right, so let's see. Okay, so let's say we have this. Let's try to project logical editor. So we'll say, we're going to try to select all chords that have the name A and set color, set to a fixed value, and let's try to make them red. Let me see if I select. Let's see if I could just select based on the name A. Yeah, so it doesn't allow us to do that. So if I was in a pinch, I may just select all of those and say, let's make those yellow. Let's make all E's. That color, F sharps. Sorry, I wish that would have worked. I had a feeling it may not have, but you could colorize the chord tracks kind of manually, even though it's probably not nearly as slick. All right, try to get my monitoring computer to wake up here. Give me a second. Thanks for all the great questions. And if you've learned something, make sure that you hit the like button. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, make sure you do that. All right, great to see John Carroll on the live stream. Don't know if this is John Carroll that I know is living in Massachusetts now, who was in Virginia. Hope you're doing well if that's you. So I see when exporting stems via the cool multiple track export feature, what indeed are the pluses and minuses of real time versus merely ones and zeros? The only real, the only time that you would need to use real time is if there was, if you were routing to external processors. So if you have like an external compressor on your voice or an external reverb or external instruments, that's when you would need to do real time processing. Otherwise, it's going to be the exact same. There's still this misperception with that, the real time sounds better than not, than doing it, but it's the same data. So we have the real time option, for those instances where it needs to physically go through and be processed through hardware in real time. I believe some early DAWs would have to do it in real time because the DSP would have to run in real time for it to process. And so there's a lot of limitations with that where you are forced to work in real time because of that workflow, but I don't think that's the case anymore. So no real difference. If you have a client that you want to pay you more time, just do a real time mix. And, it's like the old days of being an engineer and rewinding tape a lot and getting paid for it. Okay, so you just see Greg. Is that you who has gone and sat with Hans Zimmer? I heard Hans and the boys on the couch sofa on the Steinberg YouTube channel speaking about visits from Greg. So yeah, I haven't been out there in a while with COVID, but I will go out and spend some time with those guys. It's always a pleasure. I wish I could spend more. It's always like an incredible experience going to Hans's room and spending time with him. He's just such a great person. I just have so much respect and admiration for him as a person and for his abilities. So yeah, I've been there and done training, and we'll occasionally, like pre-COVID, we would just do like a little Cubase masterclass for as new versions would come out. All right, so I see from Gareth K Music. Hi Greg, can I send you a tune for bassing? Yes, send it along, and I'd be happy to play on it. Probably be able to get to it over the weekend. Okay, so I just see a question. I exported a bunch of cycle markers of one-shot drums, but every time I import them to a new session, it sets the snap points somewhere randomly in a clip. How do I set the imports to snap from the front? I believe that it will just maybe do it from the maybe from the cursor. So let me just. Okay, let me just reread this. I exported a bunch of cycle markers of one-shot drums, but every time I import them to a new session, it sets the snap point somewhere randomly in a clip. How do I set the imports to snap from front? Okay. All right. Let's give it a shot here real quick. Okay, so let's Okay, so I'm going to add a marker track and just add my cycle markers. All right, so now I'm going to export based on the cycle markers. Add to the last cycle marker here. Okay, and I won't do a real-time export, and I'll insert these and we'll create audio track. All right, we'll check where this sync point goes to. So here it looks like the snap point, as by default, is at the beginning of each of the samples. So just make sure. All right, so I exported a bunch. Every time I import them to a new session, it sets the snap point somewhere randomly in the clip. How do I set all imports to snap from front? So I believe that generally it will, by default snap to the front of the clip until it's set otherwise. And you can see that as we look at this, so if I look at this audio file, we could see that the snap points on all the files that were just exported, the snap points at the beginning. But if I'm misunderstanding your question, just let me know. I see from Hello World, Greg hangs out with Hans Zimmer. So I've gotten to spend time with him. So it's it's one of the coolest things I get to do in my job. So I've gotten to help a lot of my idols growing up. So it's a lot of fun. All right, my chat field just jumped on me. All right, so I may have lost some questions. I apologize for that. All right. So I'm going to start with I see at 3:10. So I don't think I lost too many questions, but I'm about 41 minutes behind. All right, just reading through comments. So sorry, I lost some questions. Right, great to see Cubase Junkies joined us. So you see, Greg, depending on the range of the instrument, do you use the upper range of the keyboard for key switches as much as default lower range of the keyboard? Thank you. So, I usually kind of go by the default of the sample library. So, if you're doing, if you're doing like string bass, or double bass, you may, have key switches on the top, but it could go either way, just whatever you're kind of used to. I know a lot of people, will use their left hand for articulations, and they kind of have, developed this technique over a long time where their left hand is always doing articulation. The right hand is playing the melody. So some people will set it up for that, and they may even change the range of the instrument to have more articulations available. So, but it's really, I don't do a ton of orchestral stuff. Just don't have time in my schedule with work and stuff. But I could tweak it if necessary. But just whatever you're kind of used to, I think makes sense. Okay. All right, we see Mark Graben sending nice words to Jan at Cubase Index and myself for making his life a little easier. So thank you for that. I'm sure it means a lot to Jan as well. All right, so I see from JVI. So how do you get all the extra right-click functions on only the track being selected, so not the event? Never found that. So I just do, select the track here, and that gives me kind of the context-sensitive functions right there. So, and that's on the track level with no events selected. So let me know if I'm misunderstanding JVI. All right, we see from Dan Freeman, Greg, thanks for doing these live streams. That's good. Hopefully I'm able to help people get some of their stuff done. They're enjoyable for me as well. All right, great to see Sub 403 able to make the live stream. Okay, reading through more comments. All right, we see Gareth is the cycle mode skip is the revelation of the day. All right, so I see, hey Greg, what does the guitar player option means in Chord Pads? So you could have different players, and by default, they could just have kind of like different arpeggios. So like the guitar one is, we just get this set up here. So when I come here, and let's say I'll just activate the Chord Pads. Let's see if, hang on, sorry, keep hitting my mic. It's probably super annoying. All right, let me just check my setup here. So what it is when you go into kind of like the player options, that you could have kind of a voicings, like a chord arpeggios. You could have voicings are set for piano players and guitar players because they'll be different, and that's kind of what the options are. Sorry, it's not working. That allow me to pass MIDI information during my brain cramp here. All right, so we have Daniel checking in from Munich. Thanks for joining us. All right, so I just see, Greg, using the UR24C, is there a separate routing for the headphone mix in control room so I can mute monitors whilst recording vocals to a backing track? So I don't think that the UR24C, it could be separated for that, but I think maybe if you just go to the control room, if you have this set up for, you know, your headphone monitors, and maybe you turn the control room monitors down and you have your headphone monitors set up. So if you come to, let's say, your studio setup and, or sorry, your audio connections, you know, you can add a headphones channel, and this is like intended for the control room. And once you add the headphones channel, you could just kind of switch the phones here to say, and now at this point, the audio is going to be sent to the phones in the control room and not through the outputs. I would give that a try, but let's see if there is anything in the. But I don't think it's going to be kind of separate. I mean, I think mine's kind of behind something where I can't see the control, but and there might be just a separate, let me just take a look at it. Mine's kind of behind a desk. So maybe if you adjust the output volume down and the headphones up, I could try it for before the next live stream. If you send me an email to remind me, I could have an answer. All right. So I just see I'm having some problems with Groove Agent SE. And I could really use an in-depth tutorial. So if you could, tell us like what problems that you're running or running into, I'd be happy to kind of work you through that. I mean, there are some in-depth tutorials on the Steinberg website, but if there's like a particular thing that you're stuck on, just let me know, and I'd be happy to kind of show that to you. Otherwise, we could spend about 2 hours on just Groove Agent SE. Okay, so I see just a clarification there. It says, but mainly I want to understand how to use the patterns in combination with drum kits. Okay. Okay, so usually you can load up a pattern. When you load up a particular pattern, most of them will come with drum pattern. Or if you load up a kit, most of the kits will come with drum patterns, but it's not limited to working only with those particular drum patterns. So let's say if I'm here on an Urban Ballads kit, I could come right over here. Let's say if we're playing this and we just all right, so when I come here, I could right click on the agent. I could load a kit, or I could load a kit with patterns, or I could load a pattern group just by right clicking. So we have different keys here that will switch between patterns. These patterns can be dragged and dropped onto our project window. We can edit them in the project window and drag and drop them back to the pads if you wanted to. But if I wanted to switch patterns with this, I could select this particular pad. And if I just wanted to go through different patterns, at this point I could say, okay, I want more urban hip hop stuff. And sometimes, doing something that's really atypical can give you interesting results. So let's say, okay, I'll do a different kit, but let's say I just want to go to styles here. So I wanted to go to acoustic blues. And now I could just go through. So let's say blues rock. Let's go to funk rock. And I could just load up different patterns just on that one pad. Or I could just kind of switch out the patterns. So let's say, okay, let's try heavy metal kit, but like on kind of 808 sounds. Now, some of these aren't going to be optimized for the correct sounds, but, you could try these out. So, when you go to load, a sound, you could load patterns that go with that kit, and then be able to switch them around as you see fit. Okay, so I see maybe on splitting the pads, so with the chord pads. So if you want it to add more, if you go to the settings and go to the pad layout, you could go to grid. And here, if you wanted to have like 64 different chord pads, you could have that set up as well. So if you wanted to, so maybe that would help with splitting the chord pads. Okay, I see how to create a groove agent track for each instrument. All right, so if I come here, let's say we go back to, and this could be handled differently in the acoustic agent versus the beat agent. All right, so if I'm here, let's say an acoustic agent. So now we go to our mix console here. I see everything's going into one. So if I wanted to separate these, I could come right over here and go to the mixer. And at this point, I could say I want this to go out of output 2, my snare out of output 3, hi-hat output 4, let's say rooms output 5, and output 6 for my... So now they're all kind of split out for me. If I was doing this with straight with a beat agent kit, I could come right over here, and let's say we're playing and at that point I could just go to the instrument here, select, and we'll see bus 1. So I can say this is going out of output 2. Say my snare. And then we could just assign the routing so now if I wanted to split those different sources into their own tracks, and while we're playing, let's say we're playing this, if I click on like the automation lanes here, I could see the tracks. So if you wanted to add effects, you could do it straight from there. But if I have this particular pattern on my timeline, so let's say I have that, and now this is all kind of bust out, I could take this and let's say when I go to render in place, I'll say let's do the channel settings. And now each of the drums can be isolated. Since they're being bussed out to separate outputs, they can each be isolated to their different tracks. So just see Greg, I experiment with groove quantize more. We'll pick up, learn quantize from a full song. Are there limits? So yeah, sometimes when you're doing, if you're doing like a 4-part bar of a MIDI and you extracted it from 128 measure song that that MIDI may only match up with that particular, like from the first of the 4 bars, but you could get some great results with it. All right. So I just see, is Beat Designer accessible from Groove Agent or must it be launched within Cubase? So Beat Agent is just a particular plugin. So the Beat Designer, and is just a MIDI plugin. So you could use it with any particular hardware or software drum machine. So. All right, so we see Fred is back in Norwich in the UK instead of Prague. Thanks for joining us. Okay, reading through comments. Thanks for all the great comments. Okay, so I see from Jan, says you missed part 2 of my question. Colorize event with specific name in logical editor. So let's see if we could do event names. Okay, so I'll just do a quick. All right, so let's see if we could colorize based on the names from the project logical editor. So it looks like we could do it for the events. So here I just said we want to function transform audio. And I said anything that contains the letters audio 0, like audio 02, audio 03, 04, 05, set to make it kind of orangish. And you could do it just like that. So you can do it on the event level as well. So let me know if that helps, Gareth or Jan. Okay, read through comments. So seeing some discussion, Windows 11. All right. So I see a question from David Evans. Greg, how do I move the whole outro section of a song back to come in half a beat earlier? Okay, so let's say this is our outro, these 4 events. Okay, so I'm going to set my grid to beat here. So let me just... Okay, so let's say I get enable snap. We're going to say instead of bar, let me just... So I'm just going to take these out of the folder for now, just for demonstration purposes. All right, so if I wanted to move all of these events, and again, we could set the grid here to beat. And then all you have to do, I'll show you in something that's already rhythmically viable here. All right, so let's say I just do a global cut there. So if I wanted to move all of the events back, so I just did an Alter Option X, and at that point, we could set our snap resolution to beat. So if you wanted to be half a bar, you could just move it to 2 beats, just like that. Another way to perhaps do this is if you just select 2 beats here and then just hit Shift Command Shift X, and that would automatically so whatever range we have selected, you could select your 2 beats and then just hit Command or Control plus Shift X, and that will just kind of truncate it. So that there's a couple of different approaches to that. All right, just find my spot. Okay, so I think I'm close to where I was. Thanks for the patience. And if you've learned something, make sure that you've hit the like button an odd number of times. So if you hit it twice, it undoes your like. So. All right, great to see Robbie Bowling. Just arrived from his doctor's appointment. Thanks for joining us from Dallas, Texas. I can just see from C Notes, hangs out with Greg. So I've spent some time with him, but I think it's more me hanging out with him. So. So I see from Mark Rabin, any word on SoundCloud export? Mine won't do it. So I passed it along, and I'll mention it to the quality assurance guys again. So I just see a question. Would it be possible to have the mini EQ display in the mixer show frequency 2 versus the stock EQ? So currently, they want to make sure that there's, compatibility between projects, especially people that have Cubase elements, the people that have Cubase elements that may take it somewhere to have Cubase Pro or, that has frequency, or to Nuendo. So I think they want to have kind of a common EQ that was for all of them, but, it's pretty easy just to have as an insert plugin. Okay, so we have someone checking in from Phoenix. All right. Hello, Greg. Can you set up a mixing template and be able to replace the stems or record new stems from each new project? Thanks again. I saw this is what a Nashville producer does to save time. Yeah, I bet it's his signature sound. So, if you want to do that, like, let's say, and I understand, like, if you want consistency on a recording, or it's like I want the drums to sound the same as I'm mixing the whole album. And, one of the things that you could do is, some people will just have, one project be the whole album, and that's kind of like a lot of times. And I used to work that way when it was critical when synchronizing to SMPTE timecode. So I would have one project per reel of tape. So wherever I was in the project, I would just have, the tape played. It just went to that point in the project. So what some people will do, so if that's not, so if you do that, one other method to kind of get there, Tim, is when you do, let's say you go to import tracks from project. So let's say if I come here, I'll say, okay, let's just grab, like, I want to take the drum tracks from this project. And you notice that you could automatically select matching. and if there's no matching track. But when you do this, we could choose to insert the channel and inspector settings and not import the events or the automation. So at that point, I could just import the drums. And if you're consistent with the track naming, you could automatically do this or select the particular track. And that way, all the channel settings will go over with kind of like the static mix console information of like EQs and plugins. And then you could just go kind of straight away and, work that way. So it's a very fast, easy way to accomplish that. Okay, so it says I set a key command to turn on and off the auto zoom for a selected track, but it looks like this event looks like this event aren't behaving the way it should. All right, so when you do this, sometimes there's an enlarge selected track function, and you could enable this just on the MIDI menu. And sometimes this could get thrown off. So if like when you start, that the track is smaller than the other one. So now if I select a different track, that particular track will get larger just upon selecting it. But if I had all of my tracks, let's say the same size, I can do this with Control or Command, and I'll resize, let's say, all the events. I'll turn that option off. So let's say if I had that smaller and then I do the enlarge selected track, that sometimes I've seen that kind of throw it off. So make sure that you're kind of starting from a track, maybe like take the track that's turned on and make it larger to kind of start with to set the initial size. Because if I set this smaller and select a different track, it'll maintain that same size. So make sure, try adjusting the size before selecting the track, and that should make that particular track larger. Okay, so, and I see, and when I turn it on, it just enlarges the selected track. And then if I adjust the zoom of tracks, it won't change, but the normal tracks does. So let's say if I zoom in and out, so they're both changing here. So when we zoom kind of vertically or horizontally, so now that's going to be independent if we zoom vertically. So I think that's kind of by design. So, but like, okay, if it says you want all the tracks the same size, just hold down the Control or Command key, depending what computer you're on, and now you could just adjust all the tracks to be the same size there. All right, so I see, is there a way to navigate through a clip by transients, like tab to transients in Pro Tools? So yeah, all you got to do is, so let's say if I have this particular track selected, I think it's just Alt or Option N. So I'll just zoom in so we can see it a little easier. To go to the next on the selected track, and Alt or Option B to go to the previous. So next, and back. So Alt N plus Alt B. So if I select my snare, and these transients can be modified via the hit points as well. So let's say if I select my hi-hat, there I could do the transients just on the selected track. So Alt or Option plus N or B. Thanks again for all wonderful questions. I'm about 30 minutes behind the discussion, trying to catch up. All right, so we see Graham Witcher's. Just the bit now about switching sounds with styles with the pattern is the second revelation of the day for him. So I just see, how does Groove Agent 5 compare to Groove Agent 4? I wasn't really happy how Groove Agent 4 sounded. So, there's tons of different kits and expansions for it. So I think there's going to be more options. There's going to be, I think better slicing algorithms. I'm trying to remember what some of the big differences in version 4. I think having the MIDI output was new in version 5, but definitely kind of play around with some of the kits that you get with it. So you get one called the kit, and play around with it. It's very flexible and it's cool. Okay, so I have a question. Hey, Greg, can you please show how to render the VST categories? Some VST effects are all over the place. I'd like them to be compiled into certain folders. Thanks. This is from Martin from Hamburg. Right, one of my favorite cities. I miss going to Hamburg. So we could do this in the VST plugin manager, and these are called VST plugin collections. So we could start by clicking on new, and we'll do an empty collection. We'll give it a name. So we'll call it Martin from Hamburg. And now what I could do is drag over different plugin. So let's say I just drag this over. And now if I want to do a new folder, I'll say Dynamics. And I could take these particular files and place them into my Dynamics folder. So as soon as I want to come over to my insert effects, I can now just come right over here. And this is I spelled your name wrong, sorry. And this is the preset that we just created. So again, just kind of, and I could choose a different preset. So if I want to go to the VST plugin manager. Click on the plus sign, and then you could add folders, or you could just go back to default as well. Okay. Reading through more comments. Okay, so I just see, is there a quick way to delete all insert plugins from a mixer track? Okay, so let's see if I drag these. All right, so if you come here, you could have a default preset. So let's say if I'm here, let's see if we get, there's usually some, let's see if I could. All right, let's see if I did alter option, click. All right, so I think if we come here to the inspector, I think if you option click, you could reset the rack. So give that a shot. I know it's not from the mixer. So I just see, Greg, what's your email again? So you could email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de. So I just see from Billy, hey, Greg, thanks again for your time. I used a bounce selection as a key command I use constantly. Is there a way to remove the replace events pop up after each command? I've asked for the same thing. So currently I don't know of a way of doing it, and but I've kind of asked for the same thing myself. And now that we've had a customer ask for it, I'll make sure to reiterate the feature request. Okay, I know we had people that had mailed some questions in. Let's make sure we get to those before we run out of time. Thanks for all the great questions. Okay, so I think we answered the first one from Doug. Okay, so question. I'd like to change the color of my tracks so that the track titles and the mix console channels take the color, but I like to leave the parts themselves at their default gray, so they have a standard color contrast in the editors, etc. I can't see an option to turn off the colors just for the parts. Have I missed something? If there isn't an option, what's the easiest workaround to please get the parts back to their default gray while the track keeps their new colors? Okay. just take a look for preferences. I don't think that there's a way to kind of okay, so I'll just try a new project here. Just turn off this preference real quick. Okay, so let's see if this, I think this will automatically change as we colorize the tracks. So I think what Michael wants is this to be colorized, the mixer to be colorized, but the event not to be colorized. So I'll just look into preferences one more time. Yeah, so I think what you might have to do is maybe come over here to the color setup. And just maybe change one of these to gray. So let's say if I've now changed all the colors. All right, so now what I could do is come over here and select just the events and turn them all to gray. So you could do that, and you could assign a project logical editor preset to do that. So once you created that as kind of a color, something else that a lot of people sometimes do for more contrast with editing is, let's say if I just have an audio file here, I could go to the preferences. And then you could also handle, you could adjust kind of the event opacity. So even if it is kind of very light here, you could see. So as we adjust this, you could see kind of like the events underneath. So if you wanted to have kind of contrast for editing, you could do that. And if we have this colorized, you could kind of see the waveforms without the background of the event as well. But maybe just set up a color that's very similar to gray and use that as one of the color options. Sorry about that, because the two are kind of coupled together. Okay, question. I have an AB plugin, metric AB from ADPTR as an insert in my monitors channel in a control room. Is it possible to assign a keyboard shortcut to the AB function to easily switch between my tracks and a reference without opening the plugin in Windows? So as an alternative to keyboard shortcut, could I do to assign a button one of the CC121 function buttons, but I don't know how to do this either from the MIDI learn or the AB button or the plugin function to do a channel quick control and set its parameters in the tree view. Okay, so we can, so a lot of times when we have a plugin, it's going to be instantiated in the control room. So let's say I want it to come and let's say I'll just do a compressor setting here. So a lot of times, the quick controls in a generic remote will be tied to particular tracks and we could tie to functions in the control room. But since plugins aren't necessarily tied to a track, sometimes the generic remote won't really take that. So create kind of a dummy audio track, if you will. Go to quick controls, click on the learn function and move whatever parameter that you want. So you could click on slot 2, say, okay, I want to move this, and then this will be just assigned. And then if you hit, switch to quick control mode on your CC121, which is the 2 buttons below the 4 buttons below the encoders for the EQ, then you could adjust the parameters right there for the CC121 and do that, or just anything that's using quick controls to adjust. So that's how you could assign a quick controls. So give that a shot. Okay, so I had this question. I brought this issue up in one of your Hangout sessions, and I've seen some interest in the Steinberg forums. Since I still do a fair amount of MIDI editing, I frequently have the need to have the track view, select the next track, and go back to the key editor. I typically use it in full screen mode to take advantage of all my screen's real estate. Can you put in a formal request for this feature? So let's just take a look at a project. So what you want, so that you can switch what track is being viewed in the MIDI editor by just by selecting the tracks here without leaving the MIDI editor. All right, so I think if we use this function, and it could be editing. Okay, so maybe if you use the up-down navigation commands for selecting tracks only. So let's say now I'm in my key editor, I'm full screen, I go down, and then let's hit. So let's see if I kind of move this over. Let me make sure that preference took. Yeah, so I'll put in a feature request for you. I think what you want is to be able to say, okay, from here, I want to see, what a lot of people do is, select all. And then when you go into the editor here, is to be able to kind of switch between. So that's what a lot of people do. But if you don't have the colors set up, it could be a little tricky. But I think what you want to do is just to kind of select the particular part right here instead of having to go back. So I'll definitely kind of pass that along to see if there's some more thoughts on that. Thanks for the suggestion, Dave. All right. Okay, so we just see question from Alexander. Is any quick tips to strip, reduce silence in a vocal or guitar audio part with automatic fades? All right, so let me just find... All right, so let's say if I have... All right, so if I have this particular file, and let's say I want to take this tambourine loop and kind of split it, one of the things you could do is just enable fades, by default. So you could just say auto fade in and auto fade out. And at this point, just come here to audio. And then if you go to processes to silence, sorry, wrong one. Be under advanced, detect silence. So at that point you could set kind of like your threshold to open and then just process, and then you could split the files kind of like that, and if the auto fades is turned on, that will automatically do the fades for you. All right, and let's see, the second question from Alexander. I learned from your streams that the chord track is a really powerful tool in Cubase, especially if you're not super good in music theory. As I can, you can build in the chords via proximity, but does your MIDI tracks and audio tracks can follow the chord track? So MIDI tracks can follow the chord track, and you could have that, dependent upon... So once you come to the chords, you could just choose for it to follow chords and scales, the chords or root notes. And you could do monophonic audio, like a vocal or a bass. You could have follow the chords, but not like a piano chord where it's going to switch from an A major ninth to an A minor seventh. So it's not going to do that. Okay, so we have a question from Michael Pierce, who I saw was on the live stream. So just started playing with Cubase 11, and I imported a WAV file into a project. Cubase did the sample conversion from 96K 16-bit. That's kind of an odd choice. All right, to 48K 24-bit, and the audio clip appeared on the timeline. I spliced out a section in order to do some time stretching, selected the stretch cursor, but when I went to the audio clip, there was no lower handles. There were no handles on the original clip either. In fact, it seemed even direct offline processing didn't want to time stretch this clip. Tried moving it to new tracks, but those handles never appeared. The solution was simple. I went to audio bounce selection, replaced with new clip, and lo, there are handles, and it seemed to time stretch fine. But I've never seen this behavior before. Any idea what it may have been? So when we deal with audio, we could deal with audio events and audio parts. So you may just have to select the particular events depending on some edits that you might do, and like your time stretching may have triggered this. And go to your audio menu, and you want to do, and it's probably set to a part. So if it kind of looks something like this, and now I don't have any fade handles. But if I come to my audio menu and say dissolve part, At that point, my handles will become visible. So there's kind of, and it's kind of more historical legacy editing functionality that some people are very tied to for decades of the parts and events. Most people don't get into it that are starting Cubase, but it was kind of a precursor to a lot of comping that was done as well. So just try selecting, if you run into that again, Michael, try selecting the events and go to audio and choose dissolve part. All right. Okay, so to make matters worse, I imported a profile manager setting without saving the current Cubase 11 settings. Yes, I'm kicking this from John Costigan. So how to replace events like your logical editor. So I imported, I assume that those settings, if any, are lost. At least it was my first Cubase 11 project. So if you want to get the presets like a logical editor and preferences, if you go to your start menu, and it's hard to show on Windows, but you'll see like your little start globe, go to there and you'll see programs, go to Steinberg Cubase, and then you'll see like, where you could see like the little folder. You'll see below that folder something that says like, Cubase 11.exe. You'll see application data folder or user settings. Open up that user settings folder. And then, and you could do this for your Cubase 7 or your previous version. All right. And if we wanted to do that, so once you do that, we could go to, and on the Mac, it will be under library, which you have to actually hold down the Alt key. Apple's afraid you'd find files. And then under presets, you would see all of your logical editor presets here. So go to like your preferences and you'll see Cubase 11, Cubase 10.5, previous versions. And then as you go into the presets, at that point, you'll see all of the logical editor presets just kind of show up. And these are the presets from the previous version. So they're probably right there just waiting for you. If you copy them over, you'll be all set. Okay, so we're right at the end of time. I want to thank everyone for lovely questions. We'll see everyone again on Friday. And if you have questions you want to submit in advance, please send it to clubcubase@steinberg.de. We'll also, 2 weeks from today, will be I think the last meeting of the month. So we'll have our Zoom meetup. So it would be great to see some more people join that. It's always wonderful to meet some other people. But please, everyone, stay safe and healthy, and we'll talk to you soon.